o sea que, cuéntame.
Lo único, los PDFs de Rosa y de Luis están aquí. Primero, voy a ver si puedo poner, mira, primero he puesto el de Rosa y después el de Luis.
First thing is just to remember you, what are the purpose of this roundtable. In this, basically, we want to talk about relevant policy questions and try to contribute to the public debate over them. In fact, this roundtable is broadcast to the general public. And then last year, I think the hot topic was telecom merger, because in Spain we have the merger between Vodafone and this is the next one, but last year was Orange más Móvil. And I think today, if you open the newspaper, the hot topic is, okay, what are going to be the strategies followed for Europe to close the innovation gap with the States and China? What are going to be the relation between competition and innovation, antitrust and innovation? What are the discussion about the papers, the reports of Draghi and Letta? And all this in a context of trade war and also uncertainty about the supply chains and everything. Entonces, then, the only thing, this roundtable is going to be moderated by Rosa Ferrer. And now, Rosa, it's your turn.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Let me first thank the organizers for hosting us, and also Juanjo, because he's an expert on choosing very timely topics and very challenging ones as well. He's kind of chooses the topics for others to solve them. I think I even suspect that he was involved in arranging a meeting between the leaders of Russia, China, and India in order for make the topic particularly interesting, because we are going to be talking about innovation, we're going to be talking about industrial policy, but we are also going to be talking about geopolitics, because the current world events are bringing these topics more and more entangled with each other. And Sí, perdón. So let me just bring you some numbers. Our speakers are much more knowledgeable than myself, but I'm bringing you some numbers in order to understand why is it so important to talk about innovation nowadays, even though artificial intelligence makes it really obvious. Innovation is important because it's a way to foster growth and productivity, and it's a clear contributor to social welfare and also the well-being of consumers. So there are many ways to measure innovation. One particular challenge is how to kind of really quantify who is investing and who is not, and who is pretending to invest. But one nice measure is to look at the number of unicorns. So this is companies that have been able to raise venture capital worth of $1 million. And I think this number is important because the European Union looks quite badly when we face the numbers. In particular, not to mention Spain, okay? So Spain, you can see it in orange in there, but is even kind of at the bottom of the of the interval, because in Spain, depending on the numbers, it has between 6 to 9 unicorns. As a comparison, you can see Germany. Well, you cannot see the numbers maybe, but Germany has many more, above 30. Let me give you another comparison. Some of you probably attended. I see some faces that were at the Economic Society World Congress in South Korea. South Korea has a GDP per capita a bit lower than Spain, but has 33 unicorns. So we're clearly lagging behind, and there is something we should do about. That's something we should do about. We want to avoid being the blockbuster of innovation and the blockbuster of the world economy. Sorry to kind of introduce this kind of depressing tone, but I think it's important to face things the way they are, and this is something we can react, and we can kind of suggest policy interventions. Our speakers, fortunately, we have good news that we have an excellent group of speakers today that can bring some light to these issues. In particular, they're going to be talking about innovation being increasingly central in policy debates, in particular for merger analysis, because one question is, should we allow companies to merge when this is going to be able to take advantage of scale economies and to foster innovation, even though it might decrease competition. And also they're going to talk about industrial policy, what are the gains from allowing for investment in industries that allow for technological autonomy, and also to develop strategic industries that prevent being depending on other countries' innovation. And in particular, actually, Luis, we were extremely thankful that he could make it here face-to-face today. He's also going to be talking about a policy suggestion or a policy recommendation related to second movers and the possibility to be second movers, and how this can be actually a good strategy related to artificial intelligence. So in fact, let me introduce the speakers. We are extremely fortunate to have 3 outstanding speakers. The 3 of them have academic background, and the 3 of them have held very important positions at the European Union. So Giulio Federico, who is currently a partner at Oxera, he was head of unit of different directorate generals at the European Commission. He's going to give an overview of the topics. Then we'll have Tommaso Valetti, who was chief economist of DG Competition, and is currently a full professor of the Imperial College London, and who is also going to talk about the debate between innovation and competition. And finally, Luis, we're extremely happy to have him here as well. And he has a PhD from the University of Chicago, professor at the London School of Economics, and he was the vice president of the Liberals, the Liberals political parties at the European Parliament. And overall, let me just finish my introduction by saying that the 3 of them, I think, we have to recognize that they have made a big impact in making economics useful and accessible to the general public and to make economics work in the real world. So thank you so much for being with us, and let's start with Julio.
Thank you, Rosa, and thank you, Juanjo. Buenas tardes a todos. Let me just start with a sort of apologies. I cannot be with you in Santander. That was the plan. I'm afraid I had to. Agenda at the end didn't allow it, but it's a pleasure to be at least participate online, and also good to do it with Luis again, and who's there, and Tommaso. I'm going to indeed, and I'm going to share my screen now, my slides. I'm going to focus mostly on the issues of merger control and competition. Let's see that you can see it large. Okay, good. So this works well at your end, right? Yeah. Okay. And also, let me start with a disclaimer that obviously I've worked on some of these issues at some length in the past, also with Tommaso, so hopefully we'll agree still. But also, we've just been starting a project for DG Competition, actually, on dynamic mergers. So we're going to revisit some of this debate and literature. So today, probably I won't sort of prejudge the outcome of that process and study that just started, and that will take us probably roughly a year. But some of the issues are obviously good to identify also at this early phase. Rosa, Juanjo, you hear as well, right? You hear me well, right?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, perfect, excellent, okay. So let me just say, I want to just cover three topics. A little bit of background on the competition innovation debate, which obviously is a long-standing debate, and just to give a bit of context of how it evolved over the last few years. Then an update on where we are, especially in Brussels, but probably beyond, on the policy debate. So Draghi, the new Commission, new guidelines, and the process of revising the European merger guidelines and the like. And then maybe just to end on the economic literature. Obviously, okay, I don't see the audience, but there's a full room full of academic economists, IO economists working on these issues. And I guess I'm sure Tommaso then will elaborate. But I think it's good to take stock a bit of what the literature is saying, and also maybe where it's going, or where it should be going. So I think that, and again, good also for a discussion after the main talks. So on background, maybe just to start, obviously, the traditional stance of competition authorities and governments, especially authorities, if you look at policy statements, guidelines, white papers, has been traditionally that competition was a key ingredient of productivity and competitiveness and growth. So when competition regimes are updated, when guidelines are updated, there's a clear sense that this is good, not just for static efficiency, but also for dynamic efficiency. And so it's a contributor to growth and productivity. So here are a couple of quotes from the Commission, but there's also in the UK, the similar quotes. And it would be a bit odd if authorities, competition authorities and governments introducing such authorities did not believe that competition would be good for such an important outcome of society and welfare. It would be odd if you thought that you introduce a regime, you make it stronger, but actually it may be bad for such an important determinant of growth, or maybe having ambiguous consequences. So on paper, there was, and this is a quote I'm having, these are from the last 20 years, there's been, on paper at least, a consensus that competition is good, not just for static, but also for dynamic efficiency. And in a way, this kind of reflects a sort of traditional view of competition as a dynamic process. So if you look at, at the work of the founding fathers, Smith, Marshall, Hayek, even Schumpeter, competition was seen as a dynamic process by which firms try to gain an advantage over each other by offering good deals to consumers, lower prices, new and improved products, and lower costs. And so this dynamic process means that with competition, the reward from innovating is bigger. You can capture sales from your rivals. The threat from not innovating is also larger. There's a bigger threat that somebody will come in and steal your lunch, and hence a competitive, dynamic environment is good for that type of for productivity and innovation, and good for consumers in the process, because then firms, to be able to get new consumers, they have to offer them a better deal and better products. So that's kind of, I would say, the sort of traditional stance. However, and so unfortunately Philippe is not here with us today, because he would have talked about this, but obviously there's been work from the growth literature and IO literature to the famous inverted U that Aguillon and Howitt and others have developed, both from an empirical and theoretical perspective, that has put this into doubt, right? Said, well, actually, wait a second. There may be a non-monetary relationship here. It could well be that competition is too high, reduces the rents from innovating, and actually leads to lower innovation. So there may be an optimal medium point between levels of competition and innovation. And this inverted U has been very, very influential for the last, I would say, 20, 30 years in policy circles as well. So this is this picture I have from an Etno report of the telecoms firms from a few years ago, but it is prominent and again reappears in the Draghi report. I'll mention it in a second, the Draghi report from last year. And so basically, sort of a complexity narrative has emerged whereby, I think it's been, the view was that, look, for price effects, we know what we're doing. Merger control, competition policy can actually avoid price increases and mergers that increase that lead to static harm and higher prices. And also we have a toolkit that has developed over the last 20 years to model price effects, and this has been used a lot in competition cases, but dynamic effects are harder. We should be more careful when assessing them, and probably, and then I'll come to this, there's a sort of view in some quarters at least, that if you take dynamic effects more seriously, actually you want more lenient enforcement, that this will actually mean that, yeah, you may worry about prices, but if you worry about innovation, actually, you may want to be more, allow more mergers. And again, there's a subtext of that in the Draghi report. Now, recent cases have changed this trend. So Tommaso and I worked very closely on Dow DuPont, and which is a case from almost 10 years ago now. And then other cases in other jurisdictions too, and I've mentioned a few, have kind of tried to go beyond that position. But the debate remains very open and very, I think, maybe not controversial, but I think very intense with many views from different sides. So that takes me to the policy debates and where we stand maybe now. So one point of departure, and so Juanco mentioned that, is the report of Mario Draghi on competitiveness, and hence centered on these topics, that was published last year just before the new College of Commissioners was appointed. Draghi mainly has three chapters, three pillars of the report, and so the policy implications. One is on the topic of this panel, so the innovation and productivity gap that Europe is suffering from compared to its geopolitical rivals. A second is on decarbonization and what it means for competitiveness and investments in clean tech and dependence on fossil fuels. And a third on security and resilience and how to be less dependent on external shocks. And all of these feed into Draghi's recommendations for competition policy. And I have a few here on the slides. So a concern that a focus, and this is the first quote is on telecoms, a focus on low prices might, and so competition policy and regulation actually, more than competition policy perhaps, the focus is on low prices may reduce profitability and hence investment, and that the lack of innovation in Europe may be due to excessive competition enforcement. And here we get the sort of Schumpeterian or a Guillaume sort of inverted view that perhaps tough competition erodes profits too much, leads to lower R&D, and hence may lead to less investment. And then finally, recommendations to update the merger guidelines, the European merger guidelines, to also allow, to put more emphasis on innovation in general, but also to allow merging firms to present innovation defenses. So basically claims that their merger will increase innovation and hence should be allowed. Now, that report obviously informed the mission letters. So these are the homework, the letters that the President of the Commission sends to the commissioners when they're appointed. So obviously the Spanish commissioner in charge of competition and the green transition was a recipient of one of these letters, and in that mission letter, the Draghi recommendations are de facto implemented. So there's a call for Rivera to develop a new approach to competition policy. This is again quote from the letter, one that allows European firms to scale up in global markets and be more competitive. And also there is this recommendation to amend the merger guidelines or modernize them, so have a process of revision to give more emphasis on issues such as innovation. Not only innovation, but innovation being a central element. So again, it's not saying revamp competition policy necessarily and allow for innovation defense or be more lenient to merger control to allow for bigger innovation, but there is a sense that that's one of the options on the table, and that this should be considered quite seriously. And then if we look, and then what happened since is that the European Commission indeed launched a process of revising the merger guidelines a few months ago in May. The first phase of the consultation actually closed just yesterday. So there was a first deadline yesterday for views. The Commission published 7 papers, discussion papers on a number of topics to elicit a debate and views. One of the papers is on innovation and potential competition and dynamics. It also launched this external study on dynamic merger effects back in May. And as I mentioned, we at Oxira are working on that study. I mean, we started like 2 or 3 weeks ago. That's a process that will take a year or so and will be one of the elements to inform the revision of the merger guidelines. And the plan is then to have revised guidelines adopted by the end of 27. So still 2026. So next year, a year of a sort of gathering input and reflection. And I imagine, this I don't know, but I imagine publication of draft guidelines in early 27, I'm guessing, and then consultation on those and adoption by end 27. So a long process, which is trying to really, I'm not speaking for DG Comp, even though I was formerly there, but gather many views and come with a substantial revision of the guidelines, which is a process we've seen in the US a couple of times in the last 20 years. The US guidelines were revised 2 years ago, and again in 2010, whilst the European guidelines have not changed since 2004. So obviously, I think it's due, independently of the Draghi report, I think a revision of the guidelines was due. So that's a little bit, I think, the policy debates and setting up the issues. On the economic literature, which I think speaks to our audience today and tries to make the link to policy, I would say 2 things. One is that there's a traditional literature on competition and innovation, and that's something that I think when working on with Tommaso in the past and others, we've reviewed extensively, and I put here handled with care because that literature actually doesn't always talk about, often looks at only product market competition and how product market competition changes may drive innovation incentives, but it doesn't look at innovation competition. It doesn't look at actually changes in market structure that affects both the upstream innovation market and the downstream product market. So it's not directly informative for a merger between innovators that at the same time may affect the current product market, the innovation market, and the future product market. So you have to interpret them carefully. And also that literature often looks at exogenous changes in competition parameters, such as the degree of collusion in the market, the partial collusion, the amount of product differentiation, even the number of players, but that's not the same as a merger. And so what's policy relevant? Often when you have a merger, you actually don't have a change in product differentiation, even the number of players. Once it changes, actually, the assets remain in the market of all the players. I say you reallocate those assets and allow for coordination across assets that were previously competing. So it's not the read over to competition policy is imperfect, and some of those papers, therefore, are not as relevant as they may seem. Now, there is a recent, so, okay, that's one point. The second point is that, again, I think probably most of the papers on competition innovation start with Aaron Schumpeter and say, oh, look, there's a contradiction here, and so the effects must be ambiguous. I think there's a general recognition, I think, and Shapiro contributed to this with an influential paper in 2012, that the Arrovian and Schumpeterian views are compatible with each other. The Arrovian view is that competition before innovation is likely to promote innovation because firms with market power don't want to cannibalize their own sales, but smaller firms are less concerned about that. So more competition before innovation leads to innovation. Whilst the Schumpeterian view, at least one of them, maybe not the only one, but one of them is that once you have innovation, you need to allow for lower competition, for the rents, for the rewards from that innovation to be realized. So, for example, you must grant intellectual property rights to innovators, a degree of temporary market power, to allow them to have those incentives to innovate. So the causal link there flows from innovation first to less competition after the innovation. So again, not the same causal link that Ara was concerned about. So that's one, I think, an important clarification from the literature. And then finally, the more recent literature, so Tommaso and I have a paper, was kind of coming out of that work on Dow DuPont, Massimo and Emanuele Tarantino, the current chief economists, have a similar paper from a similar period that actually, if you look at merger control, mergers directly in a standard model of competition, you actually do not get this inverted U. Absent deficiencies, you can get results whereby a merger at the same time can increase prices, but also reduce innovation. And actually, in our work with Tommaso and Gregor, you get a sort of implicit Schumpeterian effect that if you look at price effects alone, those may increase innovation incentives, but because the merger also internalizes innovation externalities, so the fact if I innovate, I harm my rival, and that effect is internalized post-merger, overall innovation may still fall, despite the fact that prices alone may induce an innovation incentive increase. Now, there's more, there are many papers now in this literature. There's probably a paper every 6 months. Some are actually showing that in alternative economic models, you may get that the effects from the product market, so the fact that there's higher prices in the product market may dominate the innovation externality effects. So you may get that post-merger prices go up, innovation goes up, but yet consumers are still harmed because those price effects are stronger than the innovation effects. Indeed, those price effects are actually inducing that higher innovation. So if you have a consumer welfare standard, which is a standard welfare standard used in competition policy, then even in those sort of models, you would want to intervene against a merger, or you'd need efficiencies to overcome those results. I think, again, as I said, I'm about to restart looking at this literature for this study for DG competition. The literature is still evolving. There's many papers and a number of results. I think what's going to be key as we go forward or we look at those papers is to identify robust results, that results that don't only rely on small exceptions to the rule, but actually identify the rule, and also to consider both the impact of mergers of both innovation and consumer welfare. There may be a question mark, if you show that in standard models, innovation goes up and consumers are yet harmed, is there a world where you want to give more weight to innovation and less to consumer welfare? You think over time this will lead to greater growth and productivity? That's not something that has been discussed yet. It's probably difficult even from a legal perspective to take into account, but it may be something that needs to be considered. So that's a little bit where the literature stands. In summary, I would say there is more guidance from the literature now than there was a few years ago on the fundamental determinants of how competition policy and merger control can foster innovation. I think it shows that merger control is an important determinant of these outcomes, even though it may not be easy to observe because it's hard to observe the counterfactual without the merger, but merger interventions and even remedies can be an important source of productivity and innovation gains compared to the counterfactual. There is growing recognition, I think, of the importance of competition of dynamic competition enforcement. So I mentioned the Dow DuPont case, Bayer Monsanto, similar features. Adobe Figma was a big case from a couple of years ago in the UK, and EC with similar concerns. And if you look at the recent guidelines, both the UK, the US, even the EC market definition notice, and going forward, the EC guidelines, there's going to be even more emphasis on this topic. I guess the real question there in Europe, will it take stock of the developments of the last 10 years and sort of make them more systematic and formalize them more in guidelines, or might it seek to build on them and depart from them in some directions that are yet to be seen, perhaps following the Draghi recommendation? So that's, I think, a big question mark for competition policy in Europe for the next 2 or 3 years, I would say. Rosa, I think I'll stop here and give you back the mic.
Yep, perfect, Giulio. Thank you so much for the very comprehensive overview. Let's now move to Tommaso.
Sure. Thank you, Rosa. Thanks a lot. I hope you can hear me. And also, I apologize for not being able to be with you. I would love to be in Santander. I would love to enjoy a few pinchos after the session in the afternoon. But here I am in London, and I'm very grateful for the invitation to this panel. I was asked a little bit last moment because Philippe Aghion was meant to join, but unfortunately Philippe couldn't make it. So I will be a very imperfect substitute in that sense. So Giulio gave a very nice presentation, which I share. Giulio, in a sense, presented the traditional orthodox view on competition, in particular competition policy and mergers on innovation. And it's typically a viewpoint that many in the past shared, that we do want to have competitive industries because that's good for consumer, but it's also good for innovation. But now, I have very idiosyncratic views, and the current zeitgeist is very different. So that view has been under attack, and the Draghi report somehow contributed to this attack, because the Draghi report is very interesting, is very comprehensive, but it deals with so many things that it can be read in so many different ways. So each one is extracting the bit which is convenient for certain agendas. But when it comes to mergers and innovation, it's quite clear that Draghi seems to suggest that we should relax competition policy. By relaxing competition policy, we should get, more innovation, more investments, and the like, which is a very curious proposition. Very, very curious proposition, because competition policy has done so little in the past that expecting that by doing even less will contribute to higher economic growth is wishful thinking. So numbers do matter. The European Commission has blocked, on average, 1 merger per year in the past 30 years. 1 per year if we go from 1 to 0, which is the only direction that is suggested in the report. Try to imagine what's going to change. Very little. Of course, parties will say, well, many mergers that could have been proposed were not proposed, but this is a proposition which conveniently cannot be assessed because we cannot assess the things which we haven't observed. So I think it's really a little bit strange, the discussion that we're having. The views that Giulio presented are probably shared with a high percentage within DG Comp. I'm not sure they are shared in Brussels overall, so there will be a tension between DG Comp's views, and which will be reiterating the orthodoxy, and instead a Franco-German agenda, which for many years have been trying to propose an agenda based on champions, on national champions. When I was back in Brussels, you may remember we blocked 1 merger, which was Alstom-Siemens, and that made the Germans and the French very unhappy. And but this discussion is coming back. I would imagine that today, even if we had the same evidence that we had back then in Alstom-Siemens, the merger would be approved. So my sense is that today the political climate has changed completely. So at the technical level, the analysis would not be different because the economics would not be different in this hypothetical scenario. However, the political decision would be very, very different. Now, my views are orthogonal to that, and I think what Europe is missing, what many national markets are missing, is a massive injection of competition. We have too little competition, we have too much consolidation, and so going in the current direction for sure is not helping. Anyway, what can we do to improve European competitiveness? Obviously, the bigger picture is something that I guess Luis will be talking about. The European project is incomplete. We have a big asset in principle, which is a single market, but we never completed that project, but we don't have a capital union. These are things which are first order, I think, but on those things, competition policy doesn't have much bearing. I think it's a political project that is incomplete, and also the current leadership is not particularly enlightening to complete such projects. So, but this would be the first order things. There is reluctance at many national levels also to forego some of the national power. So there is over-regulation in many instances. There are 27 member states different regulation, but also sometimes member states do not want to forego the national powers for obvious reasons. There is also the concern that there is very much asymmetric power, because there are 2-3 bigger states that may dictate the lines for much smaller states that are concerned about that. So this is still a bigger problem, and I suppose Luis may want to say something about this. However, Draghi has been very instrumental when it comes to the different policy instruments, is to think a little bit less in silos. I speak from a personal experience. I was dealing with competition policy, and I was never talking to DG Trade. I was never talking to people doing the trade policy or doing industrial policy. So each one was in their own silos. Now, this has been challenged, which is good. I'm going to give you perhaps a very simple example of what that means. So let's take one of the priorities of the Commission, which is net zero. That's very important, of course. And let's take one particular industry, which is, solar panels. So solar panels is something that we are not very good at producing in Europe. China is very good. China has won this battle a long time ago. Shall we do something about it? Well, solar panels, though, are installed in Europe. They have to come on our roofs in Spain, in Italy, in our sunny countries. We have lots of sun. So we have to install them. And installing solar panels is a good thing for net zero. It's good. It's a good source of green energy. And it creates local jobs, by the way. Okay, these jobs have to be, your roof is in Spain, my roof now is in the UK, etc. So they need to be installed here. So that's really an industry where we can stick to orthodoxy. So let's buy at the cheapest price from the Chinese. Forget whether the Chinese can put some strange things to spy on us on the solar panels. I will not consider that. Imagine there are no security reasons. So let's buy as cheap as possible from China. This is great. Let's have competition, let's do traditional competition policy to keep prices low. And let's not introduce any tariff. And it doesn't make any sense to subsidize our companies because we are so far away from the technological frontier that there's nothing we can do. So this is really orthodoxy. And actually, the net outcome is prices are going to go down, we install more, and we can even create more jobs for our technicians. That's great. Now, let's take green tech. Green tech is instead an industry where Europe is pretty good. Okay? Maybe we're not the best, but we are there. We are there. We have lots of experiences of companies which are, they are somehow competitive. So that's an instance instead where our companies are close to the technological frontier. So from a competition policy perspective, we may say, well, I will accept some degree of consolidation, a merger, say, between French and German firms or whatever. I will accept that because this dynamically will create the scale, the size of companies that will be able, dynamically speaking, to compete against the Chinese. Okay? So I may accept this trade-off of higher prices now in exchange for investments and higher competition in the future. In fact, I may also want to impose some tariffs on the Chinese producers to the same effect of giving advantages to our European firms, and also perhaps subsidize in doing industrial policy. And how do we do industrial policy? This is important. So we have to be internally coherent. We cannot have 27 member states doing their own demand subsidies. For instance, take a country that decides to subsidize electric vehicles or something like this, but irrespective of the origin of the vehicle. If you do that, you've done this, allow consolidation, impose tariffs in the hope that the Europeans are going to dynamically evolve into a better place, but then you subsidize the purchase of Tesla or BYD from the Chinese. So this would be internally inconsistent, but it needs a lot of coordination among 27 member states. But as you can see, you can have very different responses according to how close our companies are to the technological frontier. So it's an example. I want to say two more things before I pass it on to Luis, and then hopefully I would love to have a conversation with the audience, and again, apologies, we cannot be there. One is this debate on champions. I think champions are somehow overrated, but let me explain. I think we have a problem with our firms, small and medium sized, that cannot scale up. Okay? It's difficult for them to scale up. This is where they start, we have great ideas, and then there is not the next step. We don't have a problem at the top, okay? I don't care if I don't have super giants, okay, super dominant firms. Also because, look at the evidence. There is evidence of economies of scale when firms are growing. Okay? These are the firms that need to be helped. But when firms are growing and they're big enough, economies of scale are exhausted, okay? How much bigger can you become? Where do you get these efficiencies from? Going back to the Armstrong system, to the Armstrong Siemens, apologies, there was an efficiency defense. None from the parties that were trying to merge submitted that they were going to exploit engineering economies of scale, because they were already humongous, they were already huge. They submitted something that didn't make any sense, but they couldn't find any evidence that became even bigger because they were already the largest firms in the world. Actually, with a little bit of exposed, we blocked it, and Siemens thrives, Armstrong thrives. They're still the number 1 and number 2 companies for high-speed trains in Europe. They're doing very well internationally, so clearly we didn't do a mess. We already had 2 European champions, and it didn't make sense, actually, to get rid of one of them. Very different is the experience of Airbus instead. Airbus, there was one monopolist, Boeing, and through a European collective effort, we created a European alternative. So these are things which are non-comparable. So when it comes to champions and efficiencies, try to think about what kind of firms you're talking about. So I don't have any evidence that efficiencies, well, exist, of course, but if I look at the size distribution of firms, look at the firms we're talking about, typically these are firms which are not subject to competition policy. When I'm looking at the firms which are involved in competition policy, these are already firms which have exhausted economies of scale. This is one thing. The other thing I want to say, or at least people to reflect on, is a comment on digital and perhaps defense. So these are 2 of the priorities of the sectors that the European Union has identified, and I do believe they are very important. They are related to our sovereignty. We are saying we should create, sovereignty in both in defense, in digital, in theory. In practice, we are doing exactly the wrong steps. So in the current trade agreements that the EU negotiated with the US, we have apparently, according to what I've read in the press, committed, when it comes to defense, for instance, to buying 18 billion euros of weapons from the US. So how can you create a European industry if you are pre-committing your budget to American firms? Similarly, when it comes to digital, and on average, 80% of the European infrastructure is owned by US firms, which is not good for sovereignty, it's not good for resilience. We have evidence that they can switch off our infrastructure whenever they want. They've done it with organizations, with countries, and we are in a political climate which has changed compared to when I was younger. And so what we want to do is not obviously substitute American companies for European ones. This is wishful thinking, but we have to start creating alternatives. And a good alternatives is through procurement. Procurement is between 15 and 18% of European GDP. That's a lot of money. And we have to think about, in theory, European policies by European, and that's which I think is something which would create also a sizable demand for allowing some supply side interest and avoiding the lock-in effects that we had until now, and which is something we should do in practice. But if then von der Leyen negotiates as they did recently to buying even more from American companies, we are going exactly in the wrong direction, which is something that worries me a little bit. Now, because this is an academic audience, and I'm going to finish now, Giulio did a very good job in summarizing the current debate. I will reiterate in different words that if you think about innovation and mergers, starting from the dichotomy, Arrow versus Schumpeter is actually misleading. So rethink about it, because mergers is about unilateral effects. 2 parties were competing before, and the same 2 parties now are not competing after. These are the unilateral effects that you should have in any model. My views, I recently summarized, if you're interested, because I've seen this Arrow versus Schumpeter coming back again. We thought we had clarified it during Dow DuPont, but it's coming back again, and it's not useful. So recently, a few weeks ago, I published in Economics Letters a very short paper. You may want to have a look at it on the innovation theory of harm, where I spell out what an innovation theory of harm is about, what it actually says and what it doesn't. And actually, I'm making a stronger claim than Giulio, where so far the receiving literature, once you don't consider spillovers, which is an empirical matter, and efficiencies, which is an empirical matter, the existing literature says that there is actually a structural presumption that mergers among competitors is bad not only for prices, but also for innovation when it comes to the ultimate effect on consumers, which is the policy objective that we are pursuing. Thank you, and very happy to continue this conversation afterwards.
Thank you so much, Tommaso, for jumping into the roundtable with such a short notice, and in particular for giving practical examples, because I think we clearly need ways, real-life examples of what is the type of industrial policy that works. And that actually is a perfect transition to Luis' talk, who is going to talk about policy recommendations.
I hate this browser thing that I don't know how to ever put in full screen. If you can open it in PDF, that's better. Hello, thanks for the invitation, Juanjo and Rosa. It's great to be here, and it's great to comment on what was introduced, and also to present something to think about. I wanted to start by talking about just the two presentations. I'm sorry to say that I don't disagree, so it doesn't make for a lot of discussion. I did want to add something that wasn't really discussed, that is crucial, right? There's a bit of a bait and switch in the way that the debate on the merger guidelines is formulated. And the bait and switch is, oh, we should get economies of scale in order to only have 3 telcos in Europe. That means, oh, we should allow 4 Lithuanian operators to become 3, or 3 Lithuanian operators to become 2. That has nothing to do. That is never going to converge to 2 or 3 telcos in Europe. So let me read you, sorry I made this noise because I was looking for a Draghi report. Let me read you the Draghi report on telcos. It says, Regulation, Chapter 3, Part B. Regulation and competition policy in the telecom sector have in fact disincentivized consolidation, favoring a multiplicity of smaller players in each market. Okay, perfect. Let's make sure that we don't have national players, and let's allow as many mergers between markets as are needed. Okay, and same thing in finance, in banking. Okay, let's allow UniCredit, Commerzbank. No, UniCredit, Commerzbank not, because that's German, Italian, that's okay. So I think that the crucial thing that is missing in the conversation outside of economics is the definition of what's the relevant market. And Draghi here plays bait and switch. He says, oh, and I actually love the report. Okay, I'm a big defender. I love everything except this stuff. He says, oh, we have too many telcos. True. In the US, they only have 4. Okay. So we're going to let what? You're going to let national mergers? And that's supposed to get you to 4? You're going to get 27 tiny ones. Okay. So I agree with everything that was said, and I think that a crucial element in the discussion is that is being missed is we maybe have to think again about. I just don't think Tommaso would have, using the current guidelines, stopped a merger between a Spanish and a French telco company. Okay, that gives you more competition in Spain and in France, in fact, because now you have a more powerful operator, etc. It's not going to reduce the number of players in Spain. It's in different markets as it's obvious. Second, I wanted to quickly say, before I go to my point, I wanted to quickly say China is always throwing in competition in defense of industrial policy. China's been brutally, in the example Tommaso gave and in the other examples, it's been brutally encouraging competition. The solar panel industry has hundreds of firms. The electric vehicle competition has started with 200 firms, many of them very unprofitable. The industrial policy in Europe is always about defending our current champions. It's always about keeping what we have. At the end of the day, not what people discuss, but we actually do. And I think that's a big problem. I think instead of thinking, should we or should we not do industrial policy, we should be thinking, what kind of industrial policy is possible given our political economy? The question shouldn't be, did Korea do well with the shipping? Yeah, sure. But can we do what Korea did? Can we do that with electric cars? That means stopping subsidizing the losers, pass the money to the winners? Or do we have a political economy that is going to say we're going to continue in the same direction? My last reaction, the only place I'm going to disagree with Tommaso, and I'm not sure how strongly, and Giulio, is on the on the AI sovereignty. So let me, instead of telling you how I disagree, I'll actually explain you what my argument is going to be. So I started sneezing now. I don't know if I have an allergy. There's something here. I don't know. Sorry about that. So I'm going to tell you about an idea for an AI strategy for Europe. And anybody who's read anything I've said knows that I'm kind of skeptical about industrial policy, and yet I'm going to defend one. So let me see if I can convince you that this is kind of an exception. Let me just make this a little bit. Do they see the same screen as we see?
Yes.
So let me just reduce it so that you can see it. So this is Andrew McAfee doing the Draghi report graph, but bigger. You know, whenever you do a report, or you always have one magic slide, or one magic phrase, right? And the magic phrase of Draghi is, no ex novo European company has been created in the last 50 years with a market cap over 100 billion. I mean, it's just such a shocking thing, right? In the US, I don't know how many hundreds. Andrew McAfee has done it with 10 billion. So he went 1-0 more. And what you see is that when 10 billion is almost more depressing, right? Companies ex novo in Europe in the last 50 years, in the left US, in the right Europe. And even when you just focus on the very largest, there is a big valuation gap. I did this in May, but I think it's true exactly today, the same, right? 10 times the biggest six. I wanted to emphasize something different when I'm talking about AI. I want to emphasize the sector where they are. Handbags versus IT, okay? So look at the R&D spend per dollar of sales, okay? So in the US, basically, all of these companies are R&D kind of giants, okay? Somebody like Microsoft spending 30 billion. This is like several times Spain. I will show you Spain in a second. Microsoft spending 30 billion, NVIDIA spending Apple 30 billion in R&D. Of course, these are companies that live and die by R&D. If you look at the European ones, okay, how much are you going to spend in R&D if you are LVMH? I mean, I don't have anything against LVMH, but they're making handbags, okay? Their job is to add marketing value, not R&D value, if you think in Saturn terms. So the problem that we have is that the sizes that these AI giants are holding are incommensurate with the entire R&D budget of the European Union. So look at the entire public, first look at the public R&D budgets of the European Union. These are 2023 numbers, which are the last ones that I found. Spain, just because we're there, 11 billion, okay? Alphabet, 49 billion, okay? Germany, 47 billion. So the Amazon's R&D budget, and sorry, Amazon should have a big asterisk, and when I make this public, I will add an asterisk. Amazon counts the R&D including the cloud, so it's not just pure R&D. But Amazon's R&D budget is on its own, is 70% of the top 6 EU governments. But look at the entire R&D budget of corporate and public and private in the European Union, of all the companies and all the governments together. That's 330 billion. That's what the European Union spends in R&D. The top 6 that I show you add up to $251 billion, okay, so 222 billion euros. 2/3. So how are we going to catch up in AI? I mean, that just doesn't really make sense, okay? I think that the risk is that we are commodity users of foreign AI and that we have to pay a toll and that we become what somebody in a case I teach, when I teach strategy, called themselves dumb pipes, okay? So the telcos became dumb pipes. Telefonica, if you heard Payete ever give any speech when he was CEO, in every speech he used to say, oh, I don't know anything about the data. I'm giving my pipes for free and I don't know anything about the data I'm carrying inside, okay? So Google can know where you are, can know what you're downloading, all of those things as Google Play. I, telco, have no idea what you're putting through my network. And they became dumb pipes for the data used by the American big techs. The hotel industry has only one app, which is Booking. By the way, that's a European one, so I mean, I'm not going to excessively complain. That actually extracts the value from the reservations, and that's a 30% fee. What we want to try to do is, can we catch up without becoming dumb pipes? Okay, how can we convert into immense size into a scale advantage? And the AI race is, oh, we need to be sovereign, so we need to compete. The truth of the matter is, look at the R&D differences I showed you. Add energy costs that are 2 or 3 times higher. Add the lack of the deep tech ecosystem that we do not have at the moment. Add that our regulatory framework, GDPR, AI Act, actively discourages digital. And add planning processes which make building a data center a complete nightmare. And you think, okay, neither foundation models, in my opinion, nor the data center, the really cutting-edge computing are going to be European. So what can we do? Well, we actually do have some assets. We have a large consumer market, one of the largest in the world. We have a highly educated workforce. We have world-leading industries. We have, with lots of data, manufacturing, machine manufacturing, pharma, automotive. So what I want to suggest to you, and I want to hear a lot of criticism, because I'm still thinking about it, so that's why I'm putting it on the table, is the shift from being the innovator to being the smarter second movers, okay? So we are going, what I suggest here is an industrial strategy that says we stop subsidizing this data center industry that we're never going to succeed at. We stop subsidizing, and I understand Tommaso's criticism about switching off the data centers, okay? If Trump wants to switch off our data centers, well, that's a problem. But let's continue and discuss that later, and avoid becoming dumb pipes. So 2 principles, let me see how we're doing with time. 2 principles, speed and competition. So speed is let's go fast, let's clear the obstacles for adoption, let's experiment, and let's reduce delay, and let's maintain a competitive market for AI, force openness, mandate interoperability. And I was talking with Andrea at the break about this, and he will discuss on this issue probably in the Q&A. Prevent vendor lock-in and use single market as leverage in this discussion. So I want you to envision a world where social media is the same exact American companies as it is now, but where you own the network graph, and you own the data and your list, your graph, so that when it's all interoperable, when you post to Facebook, when I post in Facebook, which I don't have, but I could, all of you from Twitter, from Instagram, if you so choose, you can see my posts, or from any other network. Any entrant can just put a sign there saying, I'm a new network, I'm a European, I'm a Spanish network. You can just click on all these people you want to follow, and we'll just add them to your graph in any network. Think of that world, completely interoperable. Are the 6 gigantic American companies as scary there? No, I don't care. I mean, when I post, you don't know if I posted on Twitter or I posted on Facebook. You just see my message and you respond. What's the big deal? So what are the pillars of this strategy? First, we need to get rid of a lot of the AI Act. I'm very lucky because I resigned from Parliament before this was voted. So I'm not responsible for the mess, but the AI Act is a complete disaster, and we can discuss ways. I wrote in my Silicon Continent post, so just some marketing message. I have a blog which is called Silicon Continent, a Substack, with my son. Not the son that is there, but another son. And I wrote a post, and it's about all these topics. And I wrote a post basically. He actually wrote this. I didn't write on the AI Act. He wrote on the AI Act. We wrote a post on the AI Act, and it was pretty scary. GDPR. I did write a GDPR post, and you guys have seen a lot of I/O papers explaining how much our firms have suffered from it. Liability. There was a reevaluation of liability reform. Product liability directive was extended to AI products, which makes things really complicated, and eliminate a lot of the obligations that we can discuss later. Second, open standards, okay? Mandate standardized APIs, enable data portability, and forbid exclusive dealing. Now, you might think this is crazy, but this has happened, okay? PSD2, the Payment Service Directive, forced banks to allow you to choose to give access to the fintechs to your data. This has worked, okay? Through an API, a fintech can actually access to your banking data. And this has, the banks have grumble, but they have had to do it. And this actually has created a very thriving fintech ecosystem. Pillar 3, build the data advantage. We have healthcare data, which is European data. We could do the buy American idea of Tommaso and say we can do buy European, only the data can be used in Europe. Manufacturing, Germany has a manufacturing X where anonymized data is shared between manufacturers in order to facilitate the AI. We could do it at the training. We could do it at the European level. We could have training of AI models for manufacturing. And deep integration with the data, and we could use subsidies, R&D subsidies for adoption. Not spend 20 billion in making clouds, and I want to hear what Tommaso is probably going to disagree. I mean, maybe some of you will disagree from what he said before. Large deductions for embedding AI, accelerated depreciation, make R&D credits focused on implementation and not so much on data. So the starting point that I want you to contradict if you want to contradict, but otherwise if you accept, you have to start from there, is we are nowhere in that race. That race is gone. We are not going to make it there. So I presented I did a broader presentation yesterday on the European Parliament. I mentioned this idea. I mentioned also the myth of the single market and the problems of the single market. I was with the VP for the single market of the European Commission on my side, Stéphane Séjourné. So I really did make a point about how the single market is not working. But when I talked about this, some of the reactions later were, hey, what about sovereignty? Okay, one of my colleagues, ex-colleagues said, hey, you want to make sure the physical infrastructure is in our hands. I think this is misguided. I think that this is a race that we have lost. And I want to mention a couple of months after we put our I put my second mover, smart second mover post in Substack in the Silicon Continent. I saw this article in The Economist. This is last week in The Economist from the CEO of SAP, who's basically proposing a second mover idea. And he says, look, forget about it. You're not going to get that kind of hardware sovereignty. In any case, you will need the chips from NVIDIA. You will need the telecoms hardware from Asia. You will need the hard drives. I mean, that's just the train has departed, he says. And what you should do is do the public investment in the applied and AI software. And how are you going to control your data? He says, my company, well, he's actually doing his own marketing, of course. He says, SAP already offers our customers the possibility of having their own encrypted data in their own encrypted cloud, and they're not going to be, nobody's going to be watching that data. And we have the privacy and the control of the data available within the foreign cloud. Yes, Tommaso is right. It's going to be Azure. Fine, it's going to be Azure, but Azure is not going to, it's going to be the damn pipe for this data, because the data is going to be encrypted, and it's going to be SAP or whomever it is that does the implementation. Now, just a quick mention of something that I was calculating recently, the macro side of this. The macro side of this is quite interesting. The R, you remember all our macro colleagues always talk about R minus G. The R is set in the global market. The R, if the AI revolution happens, the R is going to shoot up, the real interest rates, okay? Productivity goes up, the rate of return is going to go up. The G, if we continue the path we're going, what we did with telcos, which is not adopt telcos, Eric Beltesman, we were talking with Moragat before, has a piece on that. If we do the telcos we didn't adopt, if we do the same thing for the ICT, there was no adoption. If we do the same thing we did for ICT, we did with AI, we don't get the G and we get a higher R from the rest of the world. And our sustainability of our welfare state will be in trouble. So that's it. That's an idea for a strategy. We're not running against entrenched interest. We don't have the kind of warnings that I fear, for example, in the Roderick piece about, Daniel Roderick's piece about making industrial policy. You need an industrial policy that has one objective. This is the objective: growth, productivity, getting these trends. The capture by the insiders in the political economy and letting the failures go. I don't think there's fear of capture by insiders. I think it's industrial policy that we can execute. It basically requires legislating, forgetting about legislating for safety. We've done enough to make the world safe and to be the Brussels regulatory superpower, and start legislating for competitive advantage and for protecting our future growth.
Okay, thank you so much to the three speakers for And without further ado, let's move to the questions from the audience. So please raise your hand. We have a microphone.
I want Andrea in any case. And you can be critical, that's your job.
So thanks, Luis, for mentioning me in your presentation. I've been working on cloud in the past 2 years, and I know that Europe is lagging behind. Exceptions are Germany and France. You can find 2 countries where something has been moving. For cloud computing services, you have OVH in France and Ionos in Germany, which are getting a bit bigger than before, even though the market is dominated by the usual big players, so Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, which, by the way, they have 2/3 of the market, so that's to say. For data centers, you mentioned that also Europeans lagging behind, and I agree. The only exception could be the so-called FLAP, F-L-A-P region, so Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, where data centers have been created. So even though not to the size of the US, because I think the proportion, I may be wrong, is like we have 1/5 of data centers in Europe in comparison to the US. So could be, I wasn't prepared for this talk, so I'm just trying to memorize and remember the content of some of my report and papers. And now you mentioned the Data Act, also some point which you highly criticized, correct? I see your point, especially in the Data Act. What I did not like too much was the principle of, is called functional equivalence. So moving data should be totally compatible across cloud providers. This could render the activity of those providers less innovative, because if they have to allow you to move for free, also the egress fees, the fees to move, have been banned. So I can see your point, not enough, but at the same time, I also see for the European Union that act was an important act, attempted to complement what was missing in the DMA. So I'm not that critical, but I see your point of like we face giants, not a giant, giants. So what to do? Focusing more on creating data centers, on regulating cloud, and also the cloud infrastructure, because I mean the cloud is also important to know about the stack, so the infrastructure. We tend to discuss a lot AI, but sometimes we focus not much attention on the infrastructure which is going to allow us to use AI. That's an important discussion which luckily you brought to the floor, because there's not much discussion about how this is going to be important. Not, in my opinion, not that much, not as much as I wanted. So I'm not that critical as you are, but I see where you're going. So less effort in this regulation, which at some point may not work, and more effort on the adoption. So we have an important market. We have examples, and luckily those examples come from Germany and France, luckily and unluckily, because we are in Spain, and I'm Italian, so I don't see generative AI companies, Mistral, the only one, which is French. I don't see AI health companies, the only one I know of is in France, again, which is Okin. So I see some of these companies doing a lot, and I like it, but I see only that for the moment in France and Germany, which I would like to give you more examples regarding practicing companies in Spain, Italy, Slovenia, and so on. So if I can add more later, let me know, but thanks for including me in this discussion.
So actually, I'll let you the three respond, but also Giulio, Tommaso, if you want to also respond to each other and to Luis' intervention, please feel free. Who wants to go next, first? Would you like to start, Giulio, or?
Rosa, yes, but I'd like to, we couldn't hear very well. Anyway, I think the question was mostly addressed to Luis, but also I wanted to just react a little bit, because I think, you know, I think all three of us agreed with a sort of orthodox view on the role of competition. Luis also gave a nice example for a specific industry of why competition helps. So maybe many in the room share this orthodox view. But the question is, for me, and the question also for Luis, who's been in Parliament, the European Parliament for a number of years, has been interacting closely with the political level in Europe. You know, how do we think we can actually influence policy in this environment in the most effective way? Is that, you know, if we keep, you know, obviously, you know, if we agree, you know, we keep saying the orthodox view is fine, it's probably correct, but what is the best way of, you know, either by examples, evidence, persuasion, actually conveying this view? Because I agree with Tommaso. I think the mood is shifted, and there is, I think, concrete risk that we move backwards in many ways. So interesting, particularly Luis, who's been interacting at that level very recently in Europe. What's his view on how to best have an impact?
I also make a comment, and apologies also on my side. Unfortunately, I can hear you very well from the panel. Instead, from the audience, the microphone was a bit blurred. Apologies for that. I want to say so I've said enough on telecoms in the past, but there's one thought that I would like to leave with you. So and the question is about really entrepreneurship and risk-taking. So I hear a lot now the CEO of Telefonica, of Deutsche Telekom, going around and say we need to consolidate, we need to reduce the numbers. That's helpful. So they speak a lot to the politicians, a lot. But if I go back in time, I've been studying telecoms for long. In the 90s, telecoms was actually placed, and in particular European telecoms, was placed to become what then became the big tech companies. What do I mean? They had hundreds of millions of customers already. They were enjoying network effects. They have a lot of data at their disposal. They have customer relationship, and they could have done an amazing job. The web was actually starting, and they were sitting on a trove of data that was unprecedented. Instead, what did they do? They did very bad choices. They created walled gardens at the time where networks were still expanding. It was called WAP, Wireless Application Protocol, for those who are interested in the history of technology. Very wrong technological choices. They stayed in their own national market, and they didn't become the Google, the Facebook, or the Amazon we know. So the question I would like, especially if people in the audience have access to some of these companies, to try to understand why they missed the innovation train. They were coming maybe from a different culture, former state monopolies that then were liberalized, etc. And what they do still now, the CEO of Telefonica, the CEO of Deutsche Telekom, and so forth, they go and talk to the politicians. So they think there are higher returns in trying to protect rents instead of investing into risk-taking activities, going into other markets, do something like this. So it's a fundamental question, why this European entrepreneurship did not flourish. Is it because of competition policy? Or is it because there is something more fundamental? So this is something, just a matter of reflection, that we could be in a different space now. On AI, which is a focus, I mean, I am, as you may expect, a little bit an AI skeptical. So I would like to just say that instead of squandering resources, we need to understand what are we good at, and to what extent can AI enhance what we are good at. In Europe, and this has not been the focus of this panel to a large extent, but Europe is still very good at manufacturing. We are very good at manufacturing. We still have some excellent points. So when I'm thinking about AI, is to what extent we can use these new technologies to enhance what we have. So I don't know if this is an example of a second mover advantage or not, but while I disagree on the focus of Luis on looking at the superstars, I think this is a misleading indicator of how healthy an economy is. And I also, if you know me personally, I think that focusing on firms which have created a lot of trouble to the world, we don't want to replicate those troubles going forward. So, but instead, thinking of technology to enhance where we are already good at, that is a better perspective. The last point maybe is just speaking on a bit on Luis. He said, I want to be in a world with existing companies, but as long as there is interoperability, everything is going to be good. This is part of the DMA, actually. So the DMA is the new ex-ante regulation. But again, in a situation at a point in time where politically we don't have sovereignty of our infrastructure, at the point in time when the EU is starting to enforce that regulation, the US comes in and says, stop. Okay, don't do that because we don't like it. So the cases now against Google have been stopped at the European level and so forth. So without, if you don't have cards in your hand, you don't have any bargaining power. So we need to put ourselves, maybe owning our data is a stepping stone, but it's very difficult if you don't have a little bit of your infrastructure to have any conversations with the United States at the present point in time.
Thank you, Tommaso.
Yes, thanks, Andrea, for the comments. We'll talk more because those comments are useful, and I need to build on them. And I mean, the functional equivalence point you make is relevant to discuss. So I will think about it and build back on that. On how to make or how to have impact on Giulio's question. I mean, I don't know. I think I'm a big believer in ideas. I think ideas matter. I think that people in Brussels are starved for good ideas and good analysis. I mean, I started this blog a year ago, and I mean, they tell me everybody there reads it and passes it around. So I think there is some intellectual impact of some kind. I think I recommend to any of you to look at Substack. I mean, it's really a good platform to get your ideas out there. I think it works really well, very cleanly. And the interoperability point, you own your email list. Substack actually lets you see the emails and you can take them away. So they kind of promise, in some sense, they have a credible commitment to not holding you up. So that's a good thing, but also a good example of what I'm saying. No, I'm not putting those companies, to Tommaso's points, I'm not putting those companies as an example of anything. I'm not defending them. I'm just saying, look, I mean, you're going to a fight. The guy in there has a machine gun, and you have a water pistol, okay? And you can shoot with a water pistol, and you can say, bad guy, but he's going to shoot you, okay? So this is all I'm saying. I'm not saying the guy with the machine gun is a good guy. I don't think that's the case, and I'm not saying that's the case, okay? So all I'm saying is, let's do our best with the cards we have. Do I like the cards we have? No. Do I wish we had much better cards? You bet, okay? That's just not the case. The other point Tommaso made, I was going to write it, and I see that it's empty, so I didn't write it down. No, and I mean, it's just this idea that, I mean, the US kind of is using force and against somebody who's shooting us. I mean, Tommaso is using, in a way, the same idea to say the US is using the machine gun, and we are in trouble if we try to enforce anything. I wonder, Tommaso, if we could just drop this confrontational stance. So let me try this very gingerly, because I know it's a risky argument to make. These companies think and perceive that Europeans are against them, that we hate it because we all depend on the Americans, and that we are after them. I wonder if the European Commission said, okay, we want to try the collaborative approach. We're going to do the following things. We're going to require the following things from you. I wonder what would happen. I agree with the risk. Somebody like Meta, for example. Meta is using Trump as their battering ram to hit us in the head. Meta probably is unlikely to react well. But could Google say, well, if we're going to save ourselves the headaches of future this and that and the other thing, could we agree to a certain set of good practices that are codified in the DMA, but agree voluntarily to them? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe, am I being too naive, Tommaso, Giulio? I don't know. Could we say, here's a code of conduct? We recognize that given Trump, we're not saying this publicly, but we say we recognize that given Trump is going to be hard to enforce. We want to sit on the table and try to agree on certain ground rules. And in exchange, we are committing to a certain set of, we give certain commitments from our side. Is this impossible? Is this too crazy?
Sorry, Tommaso, because we really want to hear your answer, but let me collect a few questions and so that we can, you can answer all of them at the same time. Yes, Sandro? More questions.
Hey, Sandro Shalekia. Thanks a lot for the discussion. It touched upon many pain points in Europe, but I would like to kind of narrow the scope of the discussion to the beginning of the discussion, which is, can we use somehow competition policy to address other problems that we have? It feels to me that this is a hydra that keeps coming back. 2 years ago, we were trying to use competition policy to solve environmental problems, social problems. So I don't know why this animal doesn't want to die. The reason why I think it may have to die is in line with Luis's concern about political economy. Wouldn't allowing such considerations into competition policy create a lobbying industrial complex that would use this argument, that, or the third, or the fifth, in order to defend whatever they would like to defend? Oh, it doesn't work that this helps innovation. What about environment? What about social issues? So I don't know if we, as collectively as people who are concerned with competition policy, should somehow put an end to this this monster whose head keeps growing back.
Thank you, Sandro. Any other questions? Okay, so let's allow Tommaso to respond as he was directly addressed by Luis, and then we'll go with. And you can also at the same time please answer Sandro's question if you want.
So Rosa, unfortunately I couldn't hear very well Sandro's question for the same reason as
using competition policy as a tool to solve environmental and social and all sorts of other problems. This keeps rearing its head. How do we kill it in some sense? That's how is this fair enough?
Okay, so thanks. I'll give first a very quick answer to Luis. No, I don't think that a voluntary code of conduct. I mean, these guys are ruthless. They're profit maximizers. Everything is going in their favor. Judge Meta yesterday said exactly so. They found monopoly, abuse of dominance, yet no remedy imposed. It's like you've done something bad and the remedy is, I don't know, write a thank you note or something like this. So no, I don't. So it's even been milder than the Android decision of the European Commission. So nothing. No, I don't think that they have any incentives to do anything in that sense. But you need a stronger, either the market does something or the regulator does something. We need to affect the equation of the profitability of those firms. So bringing in more competition, bringing in through enforcement, bigger fines, but it's not going to happen. On the environmental stuff, I mean, this is maybe the example I gave earlier about green tech versus solar panels is already a partial answer to the question of Sandro. We can take those into account, and for instance, being more lenient to a merger in certain dimension. I have to say that somehow I struggle to see how competition policy can be a bigger obstacle to that. And let me say something super simple. When it comes to environmental issues, we are talking about positive externalities, and so positive externalities are not delivered enough by the market, so we need greater adoption. We need prices to become cheaper. We need prices to go down. And I fail to see how relaxing competition goes in the right direction. So if you want to have cheap prices, because these prices otherwise do not incorporate the positive externalities of certain things, how allowing market concentration is not the solution for sure. Unless we are talking about So the only area, but this is really orthodoxy, is spillovers in investments. If firms are doing certain investments that they cannot appropriate because intellectual property rights are weak or something like this, then indeed the market will not deliver enough, and so concentration will internalize. Now, my limited experience, but relevant experience, the only case where environmental concerns came to the European Commission, the narrative is that firms don't talk to each other because they fear so much tough enforcements that otherwise they would be charged by having a cartel doing something stuff, so they don't share information because they fear, once again, tough enforcement. The only case where this came around was in a case which related to emissions of pollutants among European car manufacturers. The Commission was not only after American companies, it's simply that the Americans see the cases that relate to themselves. They're not interested in European car manufacturers. And that case was exactly the opposite. The car manufacturers did get together to talk about emissions, but they did not want to invest because that was too costly. So they ran a cartel to reduce the investments to cut emissions in the right way. So it's, again, the evidence that we had, there's even a very nice paper now in the review of economic studies, which is doing the empirical analysis of that case of the Commission. So, so I fail to see how relaxing competition policy can be a good direction for environmental concerns.
Thank you so much, Tommaso. Julio? And I think this is... Please take this as a final round, because we will have to wrap up.
Final round, I would say, if Juanjo needs a topic for next year, that's a good topic, because this issue of sustainability, environmental policy, competition policy will be quite prominent too. We haven't discussed it today, but will be prominent too in the revision of the guidelines, in part because the Commissioner for Competition also has a portfolio on environmental and green, and obviously you know her, she really is interested in those topics. So I think there'll be a big push to integrate the two policies, and I hope in the right direction. I agree with Tommaso. I think they can be complementary, but there is a significant risk that you don't do it in the right way. But we haven't got time to discuss it. But I think it's going to be, maybe not next year, but in a couple of years' time, it's going to be an important discussion in policy.
So I want to give you an example that I think is relevant. So this multi-bagel, everything bagel approach to policy has been very destructive of every policy. And let me give you one example and address your point. So there was this 42 billion allocated in the US to a program called BEAD. That was to put in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. This was allocated in 2021 to build rural networks in the US, okay? You know how much was spent, all the money allocated? No portion of this money has been used to actually connect households, not at all. Why? The requirements in the bill included climate mandates, union labor, DEI hiring, government-owned networks, rate regulation, network management, municipal preference. There was nobody who was able to build anything with those requirements. This is true for monetary policy. Now it has to be green and social and I don't know what else. It's true for making a train. The train has to be all these other things. I mean, I think a basic principle of policy is one instrument for one objective. And I think environmental, I've defended very much the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. I think I was one of the main proponents in Parliament. I think ETS, the emission trading scheme, the cap and trade, is crucial for the environment. I don't think competition policy has anything to do with it. And I think we should stop believing in a world without trade-offs, where every policy is good for everything, everything helps, you do more green, you grow more, everything is perfect. No, you do more green, it costs you. And that's not a problem, because we need to pay for it, because it cleans the environment. End of the story. We have to stop trying to transmit to the citizens that we do green, we'll grow, because we'll have green jobs. That is not true, and they will find out, and they will not want to do any green anymore. So I think it's the same thing with competition policy. It's the same thing with this program of the Biden administration. We need to start speaking, and I think this goes to Julia's question before. Why do people not listen to economists? Because the things that we say are the convenient things, and people realize little by little that everything that is said fits on this kind of, everything has to, be pro-climate, pro-this, pro-that, everything fits together, no trade-offs world. And there are trade-offs, and we need to acknowledge them. And I think this that you were putting on the table is a trade-off. And I hope that the competition policy is not going to be sacrificed at the altar of, not at the altar of innovation and not at the altar of environmental something, because I don't think there is actually a gain there.
Okay, so we could continue for hours, but we are out of time. So please join me in a final round of applause for this excellent roundtable.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Julio and Tommaso.
Adiós, gracias.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye.
Con ganas de más, ¿no? Pero
Esa es la tuya, no te robo.
Ah, sí, tranquilo. ¿Sabes? Pesa un montón, creo que te habrías dado cuenta de esta
Luis, ¿conoces a Daniel Peña? Daniel Peña ahora es súper activo en temas de artificial intelligence. Conoce a la gente. Bueno, pero ese tipo, no, lo que